the ADA Yield Fund, Hydra updates, info on Cardano Conf NFTs, June Hard Fork scalability updates, and a Clay cameo by Snoop Dogg. A jam-packed Cardano 360. Let's take a look together in the weekly report. Welcome back to Woodland Pools. Today it's time for the weekly report. It's the last week of the month, which means Cardano 360. This month was probably one of the most jam-packed ones we've seen in a long time, so let's jump right in. As always, we'll put links below to all the chapters so you can dig into any of them in more detail, but we're going to highlight for you what we thought were some of the most important updates. And first is a really interesting project called Project Yield. And actually, before we dig into Project Yield, a lot of people have asked questions about why does TVL matter, what is total value locked. Let's hear from them in terms of why liquidity matters, how it's used, and why they're so important.
Yes, the objective of the fund is to help jumpstart the DeFi ecosystem by providing liquidity for a lot of dApps, specifically DEXs and lenders, to help bring total value locked, or TVL, on-chain to Cardano. In early stages in DeFi ecosystems, it's important to enable a good user experience for things like swaps. So when there's adequate liquidity in a DEX or within a decentralized exchange, you need that to facilitate trading activity and to have trade executions happen in a timely manner for users. If you don't have enough liquidity, then those trades can't occur in that timely fashion, and essentially, a lot of these exchanges will struggle to perform within a certain amount of time.
So really cool stuff. If we think about when DEXs like MuesliSwap first launched, or SundaySwap, yeah, they had certain issues with scalability with the underlying blockchain itself being able to get transactions through, but one of the immediate things that they were both running into was enough liquidity for the pairs to go through in a timely fashion. So something like this with a Project Yield Fund is really exciting to see that for new DEX and DeFi protocols that are launching, that they could potentially work with these partnering entities and then have the available liquidity that they need injected the same way how you'd have sort of like an injection of any kind of capital to help bootstrap your company. These DeFi protocols can get an injection of liquidity that would be locked in and used to facilitate the swaps, and then presumably when that extra bootstrapping liquidity is no longer necessary, it could be taken out and then injected into another project to get them up and running. So really, really cool idea, really forward thinking, and a great way to help these new projects hit the ground running and get around this sort of chicken and egg scenario of you need to have a high TVL to be a successful DEX, but nobody wants to use your DEX unless the TVL is there. So there's a great idea on how this problem could be potentially solved. Next, there was an update from Ben Goertzel on why SingularityNET is choosing to move from Ethereum to Cardano. We'll let you dig into this one yourself, but it's a nice extension of what we talked about last week about the ERC20 converter. And then from there was some really good updates about Hydra and some really interesting details to keep in mind about how Hydra is going to roll out, and more importantly, how we all thought that there were some constraints from a timeline standpoint that were in place that it turns out are not actually there. We'll let Sebastian clarify it himself, but it's some really, really big and exciting news about the Hydra project. Let's listen in.
1 or 2 weeks ago, we opened the first Hydra heads on the public Cardano testnet. So far, we have been using local development networks for testing and really tinkering with our Hydra node implementation. But this time we were targeting the public Cardano testnet, which is very important to test out the behavior on the network, which is very similar to the mainnet, as it has the same parameters, latency, and deployment model. People are expecting a mainnet release of Hydra in June or October. This might happen, but I want to say something about it, really, that there is no de-release of Hydra. We had a couple versions before, and we'll have a couple of versions as we go along, becoming mature enough to handle transactions on the mainnet. So deploying Hydra is not really like flipping a switch and everything will be fast and cheap. It's more that we build a foundation, a piece of technology that the builders of Cardano can actually use and do use to create fast and cheap applications. So as we enable our users, which is the developers of Cardano and developers on Cardano, use Hydra and use Hydra Head, you will see some use cases become a bit quicker, a bit cheaper to use, and this is how we basically will roll out Hydra over the next couple of months. Another thing I would like to address is quickly that there is no need for a hard fork for Hydra to be existing, so also means that Hydra is not part of the next hard fork. It will benefit greatly from the improvements what we will get from the June hard fork and maybe potential improvements we get from the October hard fork. So Hydra heads will become more capable by having these benefits, but it's not strictly tied to it. So you will see releases of Hydra, the Hydra node, before, between, and after these hard forks.
So two really big updates in one there. The first is that Hydra is already running on the public testnet, and it can be tested out right now if you want to. It's no longer just on their local machines. But secondly, and this is the really big one that I don't think a lot of people really understood, at least we didn't fully appreciate, that Hydra is not logistically tied to the hard fork coming in June or any of the hard forks moving forward. And actually, as he was explaining this, it sort of came to mind what Matthias had said on Twitter a while back, that something that not everyone realizes is that a Hydra head is just another dApp. It uses on-chain smart validators and interacts with a Cardano node, but it's just a dApp creating an off-chain mini ledger. So it's not inherently tied to any specific release that's coming in the future. It's just another dApp that happens to make the entire blockchain have this capacity to run faster for these mini ledgers that are run on the side. So this is absolutely huge. We've all been talking about when Hydra and when scalability, and it turns out that when is just kind of the iterative releases whenever they're necessary and whenever they're available, and we're just going to see it incrementally and organically growing out, totally independent from the three main February, June, and October releases that we have coming out from IOG. And since we're already talking about those, let's actually jump ahead to the developer update where we got some really good updates and information about what is coming in the June and October releases, and let's take a look at those. So here's a high-level overview of the three main releases. February already happened. In June, we're getting the Vasil Hard Fork, and October is going to be Chang. We'll talk more about October and the governance things that are coming as we get closer, but looking at the high level of June, we're expecting some updates to Plutus, enhancements to both of the crypto primitives of VRF and KES keys, which if you're a stake pool operator, you're very familiar with, and then some enhancements on how scripts are handled on chain. Let's take a look at all of these in a little bit more detail. For the script pieces, there's 4 elements to that, but there are 2 that are really exciting. The first one that we've talked about before are reference scripts. Instead of having to package the actual smart contract script in every single time that you run it on the blockchain, you can now instead reference a single script that only has to be deployed once, and a lot less memory is taken up by the script that's executing, because all it's doing is just running a script that's hosted somewhere else and doesn't have to be inside of that block every single time. It's going to make transactions smaller and cheaper, and as I was saying, you can refer to an on-chain pre-recorded script from other transactions instead of doing it again every time. The other really big one is reference inputs, and reference inputs are really good for concurrency. The way that UTXO and extended UTXO on Cardano work is that every smart contract that's run has to reference a UTXO that's already there. And previously what would happen is that it would not only reference the UTXO, but it would actually consume this input UTXO, use it as part of the script that's executed, and then you have some output UTXOs that are generated, and then anything down the line could then use those outputs as their inputs, and you have sort of this chaining effect that you could do. But from a concurrency standpoint, it was kind of tricky because you'd need to know which one had already been used and which one was created to be able to continue down the line with your smart contracts. With reference inputs, you can now have several different scripts and blocks reference the same input without actually consuming it. So you can use the data that's held there and you can reference those with multiple blocks and multiple things running concurrently without having to consume it and worrying that maybe your block and script number 1 had already consumed the thing that 2 and 3 were also expecting. Now all 3 of them can just reference that one input, do their work, and continue on in parallel. So these 2 things, reference scripts for the size of the transactions and reference inputs for things to be able to happen in parallel concurrently, are both huge things that we expect to come out in June, and all of this is completely independent from the work that's happening iteratively with Hydra as a totally independent thing that is basically its own dApp living on the blockchain. And then the other piece that we'd referenced before, these VRF and KES keys, John Woods goes into a lot of detail about those and the logistics around why those are important. So the VRF keys are what are used to verify that transactions are signed by the right person, and they do a complex mathematical algorithm to verify this transaction with random number generation and all these things. Currently, the VRF signature was happening twice as part of the block propagation. Right now, it's going to go down to just once. And so what we're going to see from that is that node sync time will be significantly faster, which means users waiting less time before the node is fully synced. This is really important both for stake pool operators when they're doing upgrades, but also for all of us as regular consumers. This will be yet another upgrade that Daedalus will be able to see to sync up to 100% much faster. So for those that like to use Daedalus as a full node wallet and don't want to sacrifice that security, in June, when we get this VRF optimization, we should expect the Daedalus sync times to continue to get better improved and hopefully a notable improvement coming from this one. And then the optimization of the KES primitive is going to make block propagation even faster, and blockchain storage will be reduced, which means that each block header will be smaller, so the size of the whole Cardano blockchain will be smaller moving forward, which means that you don't necessarily have as dramatic of an exponential growth in the size of it. And this will be even more impactful when we have things like Mithril come out, which will make it that not only is the size of the full blockchain going to be smaller relatively as it grows, but with Mithril you won't even need the whole blockchain. So there's just so many things that are all in flight, all happening, many of them ahead of schedule, by the way. We cannot wait to hear more, but all signs are looking positive and everything is looking really, really good for 2022 and going into 2023. Very, very exciting stuff. There was also an update from the CEO of Terra Virtua, and we wanted to just point out, for those of you that were at the Cardano conference, whether in person or remotely, and you were working to get your unique Cardano conference NFTs and doing the whole thing like finding the stingrays and all of that, there have been a lot of questions about when those are actually going to be minted. At first, they were talking it being like a lottery of 1,000 of them were randomly going to be generated and then airdropped to the address that you provided. The CEO of Terra Virtua gave an update, and he said actually they've gone through a couple different iterations on how they were going to do this. And instead what's going to happen is they're going to make it sort of a self-minting mechanism. Kind of like how you could do an NFT maker on their version 1, how you can go and mint your own NFT. What they're going to do with Terra Virtua is that once it's ready to go, and it's not ready to go yet, but once it is, you'll log into your account, you'll have the different assets that you got during the conference, and then you'll be able to mint them yourself, and I assume just send them to your own wallet from there. We'll provide more details as we hear more about that. And then the big update at the end that nobody saw coming, at the very end of 360, a really great collaboration with ClayMates and someone surprising. You may have heard of it by now, but we'll play for you a little clip of it. Let's check it out.
Hey, champ, I've been checking out that Cardano, and this Web3 stuff is exciting to me.
Yeah, they got some cool claymations too.
Hey Snoop, it's Charles Hoskinson here. I'm trying to get in contact with you, man. Call me sometime.
Let's hook it up.
How cool is that? Charles confirmed on his Twitter account that yes, he will be with Snoop on the 5th. Snoop Dogg is doing an official collaboration with ClayMates NFTs. He's going to be launching a whole line on the Cardano blockchain. For those of us that have been around for a while, it's kind of insane to see this actually happening. It's actually happening. Like, it's starting to get real world, mainstream adoption. People are really starting to notice Cardano now. It's becoming undeniable at this point, from both the media influences and just like, you know, the normal people now coming across it and learning about it from these different influencers, to all of the exciting things that are happening coming up with all the scalability things that we see that are coming out in the next year or so, some of them in the next few months. We cannot wait to see what comes next. Let us know what you're most excited about, and if nothing else, we'll see you next week.